Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to Going Posta. And joining me once again is my resident Italian, Jake. So, we are going to be going over Posta Frontale, also known as Corona, or the crown. Watch this video get demonetized for saying that word. But, point being, it has a couple different names, and kind of exists in every single sword system that involves some sort of significant handguard that you can block with, as it is one of the more natural positions that you will move into when people start swinging for it, 4-foot long bars of steel at your face. But let's talk about how it's formed in the book, and then we'll start talking about its actions, as well as some kind of gray area, because as far as guards go, I find that Frontale has the most gray area associated with it. So first and foremost, let's talk about how it's generally formed. Fiore's depiction is shown left foot forward. Now, this is kind of in combination with everything else he already does. The only difference now is that the sword is going to be held at about the level of your hairline, and it is implied that the long edge is kicked off to the side, as that creates this nice little V channel that all the potential energy will be going at, as well as trapping blades quite firmly. However, there's nothing saying it couldn't be more upright. It's just kind of whatever you need to move into in that moment. Personally, I find with at least a 45-degree angle, it naturally aligns itself with my arm and creates a fantastic shock absorber. And if I can do it with one hand, then two hands is just better. But I also tend to find that I slightly reinforce with the thumb. Fiore's sketch is kind of fuzzy on whether or not his thumb is being up there, but since he is turning the sword sideways in his hand, I see no reason that that could not be plausible. But let's talk about now Frontale's use as well as the whole left forward thing. So, a couple different probabilities. Number one is someone has attacked you with a fendenti, and rather than being able to parry it out where we want to, which would be out here, where we're currently in a middle bind, right? My left foot is forward, so I've reserved my right foot to do all of my normal plays. That'd be great. However, that's not always how that's going to happen, especially when you're just doing hand motion in your parry. If he's a springier guy or he got closer to me, I may find that I have to do a bit more of a frontale to secure myself, because if I've been out here, that is dangerously close to my face. Up here though, sure. Have I opened up some target areas for him? Yes. But I need to deal with this first before I can worry about that anyway. And even if he does try to go around my sword to take hold of my arm, he has to go far enough around that I have time to move into Fenestra or something along those lines, or just get out of the way to protect myself. So, would I say it's something I encourage you to do all the time? No. Get this guy if you can. But if it happens, it's not the end of the world. Just be ready to think further down the line. So that's one possibility. Another possibility could be that I was already in a middle bind, and he attempts to slide down at my face along the blade. We already saw this action before, either with a thrust, or alternatively trying to take the hands. So, me moving up in the frontale, or as we also talk about bicorno, is a useful strategy. I personally find that frontale you're more likely to be able to move into quickly, though that's not to say that without practice you couldn't do it in bicorno. But certainly right here, I stop his sword dead, and strictly speaking, this is not a bad place for me to be since he stepped in against me to now act into the close range game, which this guard is quite good at entering in. But those are some possibilities of how you'll end up into it left foot forward. But that's nothing to say that you couldn't still do frontale right foot forward. And in fact, you will find that is quite common, For example, we're in something like this. I try to step out to hit him, and I end up having to move into frontale, but I'm right foot forward. No big deal. It's the same exact thing achieved. I can still apply all the exact same force I can. The only downside of this is that if I'm left foot forward, that means I can advance with my right foot with a passere to control his sword more directly. I'm basically underneath him with this step, and then I can grab hold and use my left foot for all of my close range plays. If I am right foot forward, it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to step out with my left foot, but that will be the most natural thing for me to do. That's fine, but now my right foot is the one that wants to be stepping forward for the close range action, so it'd probably be better off for me to try and do a blade action on this other side with that right foot. So bear in mind, if we're using the methodology that I believe Fiore has presented to us, that will play into it. So the left foot down the line is kind of what we want. But, all plans never survive contact with the enemy anyway. Now, let's talk about some other options. Obviously, once we stop that first attack, we can close in. And this is where we actually get into a concept that I call the float, which I'll probably be talking about more in some videos coming soon. But the idea being, attack comes in, I protect myself against it. Before I move in to grab him, I want to take this moment with my right passere to float his arms in a direction. Now he's going to respond to this in whatever way seems good to him, but the more I can direct them in a favorable direction for me, or provoke him to overcompensate, the better. This is exactly the same as binding on the sword or any of the other, counter guards, etc. we do, just now it's isolated into this movement that kind of floats him upward. The nice thing about this is when I float him up, my distance has now been closed, which means it's very easy for me to rip him back down. This is a very useful strategy to use when it comes to closing in, because that sort of up, down really makes grappling a lot easier. But that's one part of it. Now let's talk about, let's say you didn't want to grapple, maybe the distance is not correct, what have you. So you end up in frontale, boom. Okay, what can I do with my right foot in a different way? Well, by protecting myself against the very tip of his sword, I have gained myself range in the same way I have here, but I also got a little bit of extra momentum that I don't normally have. I can strike him out of here quite easily, I just need to make sure I step well to the side. Is it a great cut? No, but it's gonna suck on his end a lot more than it sucks on mine. It's kind of between a fendente and a mezzana, I would say, but it's certainly worth doing if you end up in this situation. So here's that one more time. I defend, passere out obliquely off the line with my right foot and bring down a mezzana. Decent strike, I keep myself covered the whole way. Especially if he's trying to retreat off of it, there's a great opportunity to hit him. So all in all, great. Okay, so now let's start talking about the more specific things that Frontale does that Fiore mentions. So Frontale, he says, can be done specifically against thrusts. We can move it up with a step off the line. Now he doesn't clarify which foot is stepping and which offline he means. I do not believe this is a cross step like the colpi de volano though. I just don't think that's a good idea against a thrust. If you can do it, cool. I'm not going to try it, right? So, a thrust is coming in. We obviously don't want to be here. Moving with the right foot is the most natural thing and reminds me a lot of breaking of the point. As to why we're driving it up rather than down, maybe there's some other factor involved here that we can't consider or even really speculate at. But human nature is to drive things up and out of our way as opposed to down. So, this, with a step off the line, sets me up still for the breaking of the point, For example, let's say, rather than being in a position where I'm comfortable breaking the point, he catches me in transition with the thrust. Uh-oh, okay, no problem, right? I have to use Frontale to protect myself for the moment, then utilize the opportunities given by the plays. Possible. Now that would imply that I'm moving offline that way. However, that's not necessarily guaranteed. It's certainly the safer of the two and the more natural, but I can still get away with moving against the sword offline with my left foot. This advantage is while yes, I do run the gauntlet of being more in front of his sword, I get a lot more angle against him. This would be my preference for then entering in for close range stuff, because at this point, I can almost get to a full throw from here. The downside is, of course, you run the risk, but risk versus reward. Which one do I think Fiore means? I have no idea, honestly. I think both are valid. I think both have their own expected risks. So do which one feels best to you. Now, in that given situation, mind you, don't be dogging. Okay, so we've got advancement off the line to protect against the first thrust. What's the second thing Fiore says? He also says against a thrust low. This is where things get kind of complicated. So, in regards to a thrust low and our deflection of it, I do believe it is just taking Frontale in front of you and moving it down. So what this looks like is I'm here, and I'm basically just going to go into mezzo porta di ferro. Nothing terribly complicated. I'm still using that same part of my sword to protect myself. Could I use the false edge? Yeah. Do I think that's wrong? No. Do I think that's what Fiore intends? I don't think so. Just because it'd be kind of out of the ordinary, and I think he might give it a different name. Now, that's speculation. Let's talk about how this second thrust comes in. I don't think you're going to use this to parry a low thrust by itself. We have the breaking of the point for that. So, what I do believe is happening is that we've got an initial thrust, which we're defending against, and he's sliding out to then attack us on the low line. Meaning we'll have to move offline and bring our Frontale down to protect us. Now this is going to look derpy, no lie. But let's look at the situation, how we got there, and why we're bringing it up. So first off, his action. I'm going to go ahead and do it to you. So we've already seen, and we're going to see again in a minute, the idea of throwing a fendenti and then letting that action continue to fold into dente. Now that can mean a couple things. Obviously I got relatively deep, so I had to kind of drag my sword across. If I just hew at him, throw a true fendenti kind of without caring, I will naturally end up here as soon as I hit that force, right? That cut was still good, I hit his guard, I end up in dente de chingado. That is one style of cutting that is fully possible. That now sets me up to attack the low line, and we know that combo is relatively common. Down, then back up. Okay, that's one option. Option two, the idea of pulling the thrust, the German term for this would be zucken, also not uncommon, very useful skill in armor. So we can presume that perhaps this exists in that form. Cut comes in, he's defended, I realize I don't have anything to do from here, but his tip isn't in my face for the moment, so I pull and thrust low instead. I can also thrust high, I have a bunch of options, it's just low is the faster. This is, I think, what's happening. So, this means that now, because we've shortened ourselves, that new thrust is coming in. I don't have time to do anything more advanced than just using the closest item I have to hand, dropping it in front of me, and moving offline. Now, if you step right foot forward, that thrust will be coming in here. I recommend you then step with your left foot forward. If you stayed left foot forward, I recommend you still move out to your left, as that thrust will be going more for here, and it actually kicks you out of the way a bit more, and you'll end up in a position similar to breaking the point out of Posta di Donna Sinistra. But let's show those actions real quick. So, first attack comes in, thrust. First thrust comes in. I defend, he pulls, I defend as best I can. Like I said, it's gonna look derpy, but I have managed to do this in sparring. I end up in a position similar to breaking the point. I can follow through with whatever attack. Option two, where I use my left foot instead. First thrust comes in, defend, he pulls. That one, in my opinion, feels a little better, as you don't have to do back and forth, and that also tends to move me away from him, so I have a much better attack, possibly going back at him. But this is what I believe Fiore means when he talks about defending high and low. Is it a great option? No. Do you have any others, though? Not really. So, you could also, by the way, use a tornare to try and defend yourself. I don't personally like it because stepping back out of the way of a thrust is just asking to get stabbed slightly lower. But, all that aside, there's one more thing that Posta Frontale can do, and this is a really cool one. So, he also describes out of the position of having defended yourself, either against a fendenti or against a thrust, it doesn't matter. I can tornare backward, and at the same time cut a fendenti into his head, which should fold me into dente de chingaro, so I may then thrust at him once, twice, thrice. So what do we think this action is? Well, if we just break down the key components of it, it's nothing too complicated. We're in the frontale, which already puts us left foot forward. We're close enough range to hit him in the head while stepping backwards, which means we're probably about here. My left foot is forward, cutting a fendenti from my right is not particularly difficult. I can even hit him without our swords dropping. As soon as I get clear, I just go ahead and fold into dente, as I've already discussed. I'm now set up to do that combo that we learned last time. Seems logical. Why do this, though? It is my personal belief that this is meant to be a counter to someone trying to close in with you. So, Jake has passed forward with his fendenti or thrust and forced me into frontale. This is good for him because I've just caused the float to happen. If he's on his game, he will then be moving in to take my upper right opening with either his pommel or his hand. I need to avoid this. The best way for me to avoid him coming in without counter-wrestling him is to bring my sword straight down on that line, because in him going forward, he actually weakens himself and will have to dedicate time to defending. Especially if you do this viciously. People are going to go, nah, and focus on defending themselves instead. That's probably not going to hit him. Even if I do hit him, I can't guarantee that one would be a fight ender, right? It's just too likely to get caught on other things. It's too short of a cut. So I need to make sure that I'm moving into a position that specifically is good against people trying to play the close range game. He even mentions this in Dente. Jake is not going to want to step forward into this. If he wants to try and grapple me or anything along those lines, he's going to walk into a point that there's no way for him to parry successfully. This is a great thing to drop into because it wards off any potential thing he may have. And when we played this in sparring and training, the kind of general consensus was if you didn't get a hold of him the first time, you did not want to try and run that gauntlet. Could you cause a double? Yes. Do you want to get stabbed below the belt? No. So that is what I believe this is for. So here's that action one more time. He cuts in, I block, I feel him just come forward, so I tornado backward with a hard cut, and now I'm set up in dente to do whatever I will do. I think it's a really, really good play, and certainly when you practice it a little bit, it's a great way to get out of the close range game when someone's trying to force it on you. The only thing that you need to be aware of is that with the left foot forward, you get a hard tornado with your fendenti. If you are right foot forward, you will probably end up needing to do something a bit more like this. We'll go slowly. As he starts to come forward, I'm going to do more of a decrescere followed by a second decrescere, so a simple step backward. It's not going to be as powerful, but it will still put you in the dente. And you need to watch out for it because you need right leg forward for this successful dente de cingaro. But otherwise, that brings Frontale to an end. It's a really useful guard, but much like its German counterpart, it's situational. There are better things that you can probably be in, and hopefully you are. But if you find yourself here, all hope is not lost. You just need to play to its strengths and be aware that he kind of has the opportunity to choose where that fight is going to go, so shut him down as soon as you can. But otherwise, thank you very much, Jake. And that was Posta Frontale. Next week, we've only got one guard left. We're going to be going over the next version of Dente den Cingaro and kind of learning about some fun things involving a bit more with that low line, high line stuff I was just talking about. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and we'll go over some other techniques another time.